I think we're getting ready to get started. Jess, are we?
Yeah, we're still waiting for some folks to join, but we'll get started and admit folks as they come along. So welcome everybody to our second Fair Housing Friday. This is the second of 3 webinars, and we're doing these for Fair Housing Month. And we had our first one last week on the state and federal response to COVID-19, and it was a great session. We had about 30 people on last week's call, and we're looking forward to the conversation today. So I'm Jess Hyman. I'm the director of the Fair Housing Project at CVOEO, here today with Karin, Education and Outreach Coordinator, and also with Karin Ames from Vermont Tenants, another one of CVOEO's statewide housing programs. And Madeline Roberts, our Vermont Tenants Advocate, is joining us on the call as well, and she'll be responding to questions in the chat. And we also have Erika Johnson from Vermont Legal Aid joining us. So we're really excited to talk about tenants' rights and renting during COVID-19. It's a big topic. We're going to have some great presentations, lots of time for questions. And so thank you all for joining us today. We had more than 70 people signed up. So far we have about 38 joining us. And so we're looking forward to a good group. The group is a real mix of community members, advocates, housing professionals, and other fair housing folks. So we're looking forward to a good conversation. As Karin said, we are recording this webinar, and it will be available to everyone afterwards. We will send out a link to the recording of the webinar, as well as other resources. But before we go over the details for today's session, we want to talk a little bit more about the Fair Housing Project and your fair housing rights. So take it away, Karin.
Great, thanks, Jess. And thanks again for everyone for joining us for the call today. So the Fair Housing Project is a statewide housing program that works to protect and expand the fair housing rights of everyone who has experienced discrimination or exclusion. As part of that mission, we coordinate Thriving Communities. It's a statewide collaboration to raise awareness about the economic and social benefits of affordable, inclusive housing. Each year in April, we recognize the anniversary of the passing of the Fair Housing Act in 1968, which put essential protections into federal law, making it illegal to discriminate in the rental, sale, or financing of housing based off of the federal protected classes of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, family status, or disability. Here in Vermont, we have the additional protections in place, including age, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, receipt of public assistance, denial of development permitting based off of income of prospective residents, and most recently, we have an addition of victims of sexual abuse, assault, or stalking. So this means it's against the law for you to be treated unfairly because of your membership of being one of these protected classes. And discrimination is not always obvious, and it can take place in many different forms. So a more clear example would be a landlord denies you housing based off of being a part of this protected class, or maybe advertises a unit as being occupied or off the market when it in fact is unoccupied. But it also can happen in advertisements or when you've already settled in your home, or if the terms and conditions of your lease are different than other tenants renting from the same landlord. We do encourage you, if you're experiencing legal housing discrimination, or even if you have concerns around that, think that might be happening, please contact us at the Fair Housing Project, also, or the Human Rights Commission or Vermont Legal Aid. And we will be providing those resources in the chat box so that you have that. So our topics today, as Jess mentioned, is Tenants Rights and Renting during COVID-19. We have two special guests with us. We have Erika from Vermont Legal Aid and Karin Ames from CVOEO's own Vermont tenants. So thank you both for joining us. And I just want to go over a few housekeeping notes. We have, as I said multiple times, we've muted you all. If you could remain muted until the Q&A session, thank you. And then of course, we will be recording this session. I see it's recording this time, so we'll be sharing this with you at the, at the beginning of next week, hopefully. I showed you all the raise hand feature, but just for those who might have joined late, if you click the participants icon at the bottom of your screen, I'll come up and that's how you raise your hand, and we'll be using that for the Q&A. We do have now 42 people on the call, so just hold on to your questions until the end or stick them in the chat box. And then if you're having technical issues, please let us know in the chat. Jess has provided her phone number, 802-598-3139. We'll also be sharing that in the text. So feel free to give her a chat or text or put it in the chat box if you have any issues that we can help you with. Okay, well, without further ado, Karin, do you want to take it away?
Sure, thanks so much, Jess and Karin, for giving us this opportunity to get information out to folks. So Vermont Tenants Program, I'll just give you a brief overview and before I pass it over to Erika. Vermont Tenants Program is a statewide program, so no matter where you are renting in Vermont, you can use our services. And Jess, did you want to show our website? Do you want to screen share the website? That'd be great. So one of our large services is the tenant hotline. So you can see the number there on your screen, 802-864-0099. And our tenant advocate, Madeline, monitors that line. She is very experienced and very knowledgeable and very kind and very supportive. And if we don't know the answer, she'll give you a lot of time and attention researching it, and also referring you to other folks who might be able to answer your question as well. So the tenant hotline is a good resource for specific situations. Even though you might know something about the law, you get yourself into a specific situation and you might need some help walking through that situation. The process for getting repairs done, for example, and also we do referrals to other agencies like Vermont Legal Aid or town health officers or other social service agencies. So that's one of the kind of three branches of what Vermont Tenants does. And one note I want to make about using the hotline, because Madeline's on the phone a lot, it can be a really good idea to email. And the email is now on our website right there underneath the main phone number. And if you want to email just a good time for her to call, then she can give you a call back. That might facilitate a real quick connection with her. So I wanted to point that out. So another avenue of getting information out to people is through classes and workshops. And that's the piece that I coordinate. Right now we're doing webinars with our main class, Tenant Skills, which is all about rights and responsibilities of being a tenant. And we also include information on fair housing and disability rights with some really specific information. And I conduct these workshops as more like a dialogue. So it's really a conversation piece. I have some information to share, but I really encourage individual questions and sharing of information around participants, because often participants come with like a really rich experience and can, sharing among among the group can be a really, really good educational experience. So that's piece two. And then piece three is advocacy, and that piece looks like doing testimonials at the State House and other advocacy type work. So maybe that's a good overview, and we might swing back to that website, Jess, if you could leave that up at some point, because if we start talking about a couple of the main issues that we're getting a lot of phone calls around, there might be resources there, like our sample letters I want to point out too. But I'll leave it there and invite Erika.
Great, thank you so much, Karin. I'll just give a brief overview because I'm really excited to dive into the substance with you all today. So my name's Erika Johnson. I'm an attorney at Vermont Legal Aid, and we are a civil legal services organization. We are also statewide, so we help folks all around Vermont. And we help people with issues like housing, benefits, and healthcare. I'm an attorney in the Housing Discrimination Law Project, so I do a lot of work on the issues of fair housing that Karin was talking about earlier. And I also do landlord-tenant work, which is what we'll be talking about today. We're going to address some of the common questions that we've been getting about renting during the COVID epidemic, and then we're going to open it up to you all for questions. I would really encourage you all to visit our website, vermontlawhelp.org. That's vtlawhelp.org. Jess, if you're actually able to pull up the page, that'd be great. It has lots of information about all types of legal issues. You can also see that green banner at the top that says new COVID-19 coronavirus. If you click that, it has a lot of information specific to what's going on with COVID, including some of the stuff that we'll be covering today, but way more than we could cover in the time that we have. So keep that in mind as well. And with that, I will throw it back to Karin to kick us off.
Okay, so let's just get started with some of the questions that we've been getting a lot of calls about. And what Erika and I will do is I will share the general information that I would normally give out in non-COVID time, and then let Erika speak to the COVID specific information. So landlord access is a question, is an issue that we get a lot of calls on, generally speaking, even in non-COVID time. So landlords have to follow a procedure to get access to a rental property. When a tenant signs a lease, that part of that is that property becomes their home, right? And they have a right to privacy. So landlords can only enter a rental property with 48 hours notice between the hours of 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. unless the tenant wants a repair done and wants to let someone in outside of those hours. And they can only enter the property for specific reasons. But in the time of COVID, what's the advice, Erika?
So the thing to keep in mind about landlord access during COVID is that the words of the law haven't changed. There hasn't been an update to the statute since COVID has happened, but what has changed is how we can understand and apply that law. So Karin, you were talking about how a landlord can come in if the tenant gives them permission. So for example, the law says that a tenant should give that permission or that consent unless it's unreasonable. They shouldn't unreasonably withhold consent. But what's reasonable looks really different in the time of COVID than it does at any other time. So for example, if you or a member of your household has been told by your healthcare provider to quarantine, if a member of your household is at risk, like these are some situations in which it might be reasonable to tell your landlord, no, I'm not comfortable allowing you to come in. And we at Vermont Legal Aid, we've been encouraging folks, if you are in one of those specific situations where you have healthcare concerns that make it so you would prefer that your landlord not come in during this time, that we encourage you to fill out what's called a reasonable accommodation request, asking your landlord not to come in. You can find more information about how to do that on our website, vtlawhelp.org, or you can give us a call and we can talk you through how to do that. And another thing to keep in mind is, like Karin said, that a landlord can only come in for specific reasons. Some of the things that the statute talks about are when it's necessary to make repairs. Well, what does it mean to be necessary to make repairs? And we have been, we've been thinking at Vermont Legal Aid that some of the repairs that might seem more necessary during normal times are not as necessary during a pandemic. There might still be things that are necessary, like if you don't have any access to plumbing or other utilities that aren't working, that might be a necessary repair. But if your specific situation makes it so that you're at more risk with your landlord coming in or bringing in repair folks, then you might not be under the same obligation to allow access that you might have been if this weren't a pandemic. So those are some things to consider when you're thinking through that. Am I personally in a situation because of COVID, or is someone in my household in a situation because of COVID that it doesn't feel like reasonable or necessary for my landlord to come in? And one example of that would be if your landlord wants to show your apartment to someone who is thinking about renting or potentially buying after your lease is over. That's a situation where we would argue, well, it's not really necessary to do that right now, especially in light of the government's order that close contact business should be suspended for the moment. That's a situation where we would say, no, the law doesn't actually require that to be happening. So that's a little bit on that.
Okay, another question that we get a lot of, or another issue that we get a lot of phone calls about, and that there's a lot of confusion about, is termination versus eviction. So termination is when a landlord gives you notice to end your tenancy. So if your lease is coming up with appropriate notice, your landlord can end your tenancy, asking you to leave. That would be a termination. An eviction is when a landlord asks you to terminate with cause for lack of payment of rent, for example, or criminal activity going on in the property, or any violation of a lease agreement. And when I talk about this in my classes, I really go over 5 basic steps of an eviction. And the first includes the 14-day notice by the landlord. And at that point is when I really encourage people to seek help the minute you get that 14-day notice. And for one thing, that folks might be eligible for housing assistance through our housing assistance program at CVOEO if folks are at imminent risk of being homeless. So if 14 days go by and the tenant hasn't moved, then the landlord would go to the court and file a summons and complaint. And the sheriff would issue that to the tenant. And the tenant then has a responsibility to file an answer with the court. And that's where, again, it's really important to get help in this process, because the response to the court needs to be done in a super legal way. So if the landlord had 3 items that they're making claims against the tenant has to respond to each item instead of like a narrative format. And that's often misunderstood. And then the court makes a determination, and if the tenant is going to be evicted, then the court would issue a writ of possession. So those are kind of the five basic steps. So there's been a lot of questions around that process during COVID-19. So I'll let Erika speak to that, and also correct me if I had any errors in my legal process there.
Oh, thank you. No, that general information is all accurate and up to date. So a few bits on what's the same during COVID, what's different. So right now we don't have an across the board statewide ban on terminating tenancies. So ending a tenancy agreement, or on filing eviction cases right now. There may be something coming down the pike through the state. So we encourage folks again to keep checking our website, vtlawhelp.org, for the latest updates if that changes. But where we are right now, there's nothing that says across the board that landlords in the state of Vermont can't terminate tenancies or file eviction cases. Now, certain landlords aren't able to, so to file certain types of cases. So for example, if you are in housing that is federally subsidized or that has received funding from the federal government, landlords aren't supposed to be terminating tenancies for non-payment specifically. Those landlords can still give termination notices for a lease violation, or if you're at the end of your lease term, what's called no cause. There's nothing in the law that stops them from doing that right now, but non-payment terminations in federally subsidized properties are put on hold for now. And there are also, in just the eviction filing context, there are certain court systems that are not doing hearings on eviction cases, but those cases can still be filed. But again, that's not, that's not a total statewide halt on eviction filings or tenancy terminations. So it's a very case-specific situation. So the big takeaway here is that if you are receiving a notice terminating your tenancy, or if you are being served paperwork of eviction, like court paperwork by a sheriff, you should give Vermont Legal Aid a call. We can find our number on the website, because right now you still have deadlines to respond to that paperwork. Those deadlines haven't been extended or paused. So you should give us a call and we can help you file that paperwork and make sure that you preserve the opportunity to make a defense to your case. And the other thing to keep in mind, like any time during a tenancy, your landlord can't evict you without a court order. They can't come in and change your locks. They can't turn off your utilities. They can't bang on your door every night until you agree to leave. They have to go through the court process just like any other time. They have to get that order from a court, and then it has to be served by a sheriff. And then ultimately the sheriff, not your landlord, is the one that would be executing that order from the court. That order is called a writ of possession. If you have been served a writ of possession, that's another situation that you should call Vermont Legal Aid immediately. We've had a lot of great success in getting courts to put a pause on those writs of possession. Again, those orders telling you that you have to be out by a certain day. So that's another situation where you should call us immediately, because right now we don't have a statewide pause on those things. But like I said, keep posted on vtlawhelp.org, because there may be changes to that coming in the next few weeks. But right now, that's where we are. And Karin, did you want to talk a little bit about some of the other common questions that we've been getting?
Sure. So the other two that we wanted to highlight, I'm not sure we'll have time for both of them, but I'll hit on major code violations, because sort of backing up, repairs fall into one of two categories. One would be minor repairs and the other would be major code violations. And by code violations, I mean violations of the health code. And those are issues that affect your safety or health. Normally what we recommend to people is, no matter whether it's a small repair or a major code violation, you would notify your landlord, and depending on how severe the code violation was, you'd give the landlord some time to make that repair. If it's severe, or if the landlord isn't as on top of it as need be, then we would recommend that you call your town health officer, or in Burlington or Barre, your code enforcement, or a few other larger towns, your code enforcement office, and they can come out and do an inspection. But in the time of COVID, inspections are not recommended, right? So that's where we're getting a lot of phone calls. And I think that it comes down to a judgment. How severe is it? If it's something that's really life-threatening, that really is severe, then you probably want to call emergency services. But if it's not, and it's something that you've been living with for a little while, it may mean that you kind of have to live with that a little longer until it's safe for both you and the town health officer to come in and do that inspection. Is that about what you've been letting people?
Yeah, definitely. I also want to really quickly, I see we're about to transfer into questions, but I also wanted to really quickly touch on notice periods for leases. So right now there's no law that says that you can get out of your lease early because of COVID. So if you still had a few more months on your lease, but you're looking to move or, to quarantine in, in another house, your lease does still apply, and you still need to give notice to your landlord if you want to leave. But your landlord, once you give your landlord notice, your landlord does have a legal obligation to try to fill your spot, so that you may not be on the hook for all the time left on your lease, but you might still be responsible for the time between when you give notice and your landlord fills your spot. And I'm sure we'll have some questions coming in about that, but I wanted to give that brief overview really quickly before we transition.
Great. And Karin, did you have anything else to add, or do you feel comfortable transitioning to the Q&A portion of the?
No, Q&A is great.
All right, and Jess is going to be facilitating that. Jess?
Great. So thank you, Karin and Erika. So for the Q&A, we're going to be using the raise hand feature. And so if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to click on raise hand. And you can get to that by going to the participants, look for the participants icon, and then click on the raise hand, and that'll let me know that you have a question. I'll call on you, and then you can unmute yourself and ask the question. You're also welcome to put a question at any time into the chat box. And Madeline's been doing a great job of responding to questions as they come up there. We'll also be, Karin will also be keeping an eye on it too. And so if there's a question that seems to be needed to be asked verbally, we'll ask that verbally too. So when we call on you, please try and be as succinct as possible. We want to make sure to get to everyone. And we will also be sharing the log of the chat after the webinar as well. So we are ready to take questions. So feel free to raise a hand and we will call on you. There must be some questions out there.
Yeah, don't everyone all jump up at once.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, Karin, did you have other questions that come up on the hotline that we haven't gone over that we can delve deeper into while people kind of formulate their thoughts?
Well, I think, Erika, the only other one that I had in mind was the one that I think Erika just touched on with transitioning. If you're no longer living in the property, but you still have the lease, what to do about that. So, and that's an issue that comes up normally anyway. You're living in a situation, you get a new job. You're not going to want to turn down the new job just because you're in this lease, so how to negotiate that. And under normal circumstances, I encourage people, I have friends who find friends to take over their lease, and they kind of do that routinely as they're sort of moving up the, getting a better and better place for themselves. So yeah, that can be a really good option is what can you do to help the landlord refill that spot?
Yeah, I think that's a good piece of advice too, especially from a legal standpoint. If you can show that your landlord had an opportunity to fill your spot with someone who was going to pay the rent and move in there, then that's a good position for you to be in if down the line you are in a dispute with your landlord about whether or not you were supposed to be paying and whether the landlord did everything they could to find someone to fill your spot. So we would say that that's a pretty good strategy going forward as well.
So I'm trying to think of other questions that often come up. Are there questions, Jess? Interrupt me at any time.
We do have some questions coming up on the
good.
chat. So the first one that came up was about UVM students. And I mean, I know that we've kind of had a conversation about this, but I'll just read what was put into the chat and we can kind of expand as we see fit. So the question is, UVM students are worried about what will happen if the state orders stay-at-home orders past their lease period. like May 31st. Any conversation about this happening?
So it sounds like what is being asked is what will happen if a UVM student is renting a private apartment, not in a dorm, just with a private landlord. Their lease expires May 31st, and the stay-at-home order is still effective past then. So that's a situation in which it's probably good to be proactive and reach out to your landlord about the amount of time you might need to stay. There's, the stay-at-home order is affecting, both landlords and tenants in the sense that people are staying in place and not moving. So, it might be that your landlord is in the position where they would prefer to know that they have some regular rent coming in through June, July, rather than trying to turn over an apartment during the middle of an order when everyone is kind of staying put. So that's, that's one strategy. In terms of, the legal standpoint, right now we don't have any law that says that you can automatically extend your lease during the state of emergency or during the stay-at-home order. Nothing like that there. So it's still the best advice and best practice to try to work with your landlord to see if you can negotiate an extension up front.
Thank you, Erika. And we have another question here from the chat. So, what can renters do if they can't pay their rent because of disruption in their income and the landlord won't work with them? So.
Yeah, Karin, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the resources that you flagged a little bit earlier. So, giving folks a number to call for that.
Yeah, sure. So if renters are in a situation of becoming homeless because they can't afford back rent, they should call community action. And there are community action, there are 5 offices of economic opportunity spread throughout the state of Vermont. So there will be a community action office near you. Locally in Chittenden County, it would be CVOEO. And the main number there is 802-863-6248. I think that your website, though, Erika, also encourages people to dial 211 and get advice about just resources that are out there for this particular situation.
Yeah, definitely. And another plug for the website. I know I keep saying, keep going to vtlawhelp.org for updates as they happen, but I'm just one last plug for it. There might be, in the future, there might be another financial resource, that the state might pass a law expanding the financial resources for people who are in that situation of having their income affected by COVID and not being able to make rent. We don't have anything like that right now, or at least there's not any new COVID specific resources for that right now. So we are still working with the general rental assistance resources, but that might change in the near future. So keep checking the website and see if there are any updates.
Jess, do you want to show that website? It might be just good for people to get a visual of the Vermont lot. Did you already show that? Maybe I missed it.
We showed it a little bit at the beginning, but
okay.
It doesn't grow old.
It's really well done. Yeah.
And we do, Karin, we have been putting, I know you're not looking at the chat as closely as I am, but we've been trying to put every time a resource is mentioned, we try and stick that right in the chat via link, or if it's a phone number, we put the phone number in the chat. And Jess, I don't know if it's easier for me to read the questions in the chat. Okay. I'm gonna read this question kind of just word for word, so just bear with me here. This question is from Sharon. This is more general, but of course applies to COVID-19 too. If my lease requires me to move out before the end of the month, May 25th, is there anything that requires prorated rent? My landlord claimed they were trying to work with people, but haven't agreed to even prorate for that. Didn't offer to waive the late fee, nothing. Just told me I had to pay the entire month's rent. They charge $50 late fee and $50 bounce ACH fee. Are these fees legal? And is there anything I can do to convince them to please work with me a little? I've lost part of my income and now can't afford to pay a full month's rent at both places by May 1st. Do I have any options?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I'm really sorry to hear about, how this has affected you. This is a situation that I would definitely encourage you to call Vermont Legal Aid so we can take a look at your specific lease and give you more specific advice. I can't answer that specific question without having seen your lease, but in general, fees are supposed to be provided for specifically in the lease, and they're also supposed to be like reasonably related to actual expenses the landlord has incurred, not punitive fees. So they're supposed to be things like, if there's a bounced check fee, the landlord's supposed to be able to show, well, I incurred extra expenses as a result of that bounced check because I had to, I got an overdraft fee or a fee for my bank for trying to access that money, or I had to spend more time in staff hours trying to collect that money, things like that. So there shouldn't just be flat fees where there's no relationship between the fee that's being charged and an expense for the landlord. So that's kind of the fee bit. As far as the full month's rent for May, that is a really lease specific question. So we would really encourage you to give us a call and to have a copy of your lease handy so you can just send it to us very quickly and we can take a look at it and give you a more specific advice.
Thank you, Erika. So we had a question about rent relief. And there is a bill that's starting to work its way through the legislature that will address rent relief. And the question is whether the relief funds would go to the renter or the landlord. And that's something I'm not sure of now. This is a new bill that's just working its way through, so we will have some information about that soon. The other part of the question the person asked is how do we advocate for a rent relief bill? And so the most important thing to do is to call the governor's office, call your representative, and let them know that this is something that you want. So we all have a voice, and our elected representatives listen to those voices. So it's very easy to call, to leave messages with the governor's office, with your state senator or your representatives, and let them know that this is something that's important to you and that you want to see happen. And we'll include links with information and phone numbers when we send out the resources after this call.
And Jess, that's kind of reiterating, I know that Erhard expanded on that in that in our follow-up conversation with him, and that was really specifically what he said as well, is that the funds are out there, call your representatives.
So we've got a couple more questions in the chat. So there's someone is asking, are there any protections for either landlord or fellow tenants when an occupant is participating in unsafe activities, such as drug activities or other unsafe activities?
Sorry, I think I missed part of that question.
Sure. So one of the participants is asking whether there's protection for the landlord and tenants if there are unsafe activities, such as possible drug trafficking happening in the building, and at this current time. And it looks like also, so either unsafe activities like drugs or things that might require people to access the building in ways that should not be permitted at this time.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. So like we talked about a little bit earlier in terms of landlord access, the provisions of the law right now haven't changed regarding when a landlord can access a building. So the statutory language is the same. Like we said before, one thing we're really encouraging folks to do is to consider what is, reasonable and necessary in this, in the time of COVID. So putting minor issues to the side to reduce exposure and reduce risk for everyone, both landlords and tenants, of becoming at risk of infection. But you're highlighting a bigger picture question about safety issues. And right now the law hasn't provided additional protections for either landlords or tenants in that situation. We still have landlords still have the same access to terminating tenancies for lease violations. That may not be the case going forward, but that is still where we are right now. But again, still, because of the nature of the COVID pandemic and the kind of the widespread response, we are definitely encouraging everyone, landlords and tenants, to consider very carefully whether anything that requires access to the building is really necessary at this time, or if it's something that can wait, or whether whether action that would require people to leave their homes is necessary right now, or if it's something that can wait.
Thank you. And what about the another side of that? So what if my neighbors aren't respecting the social distancing and stay-at-home orders and are having people over all the time, or there's a steady stream of traffic to and from a neighbor's home? What should someone do?
So I think you're asking about if it sounds like what you're asking about is if people are in kind of close quarters, like maybe in a multi-unit building. Yeah, there's not really specific in terms of the landlord tenant avenue. There's not really specific things that say it's a violation of your neighbor's lease to be to be interacting with their household members or going to and from their unit. We don't know, like we are still allowed to leave for essential activities, and it's really difficult to know everyone's particular situations, whether they need to leave multiple times a day to care for an ailing family member, or whether they are a member of their household needs healthcare that they need to be brought to and from a provider's office, or whether they are themselves involved in in being a frontline assistance, being a healthcare provider, or things like that. So I think the best advice in that situation is to do what we can to continue to limit our own interactions with folks outside our own homes, and just to focus on doing what we can to keep ourselves and those around us safe.
I feel like we're starting to wrap up here. Are there questions that we've missed in the? Oh, actually, there is a question that just popped up that I want to make sure we touch on. Are tenants with Section 8 vouchers still being subjected to annual unit inspections during COVID-19?
That is a great question, and I believe that what is happening right now is that Section 8 is only doing inspections at the request of folks who are calling and asking for inspections. I know of at least one Section 8 inspector statewide who is responding to requests, but I have not heard. I believe that the housing authorities are pausing the routine inspections. And if you hear differently and you want to give us a call at Vermont Legal Aid and let us know, would appreciate that. But that's my understanding right now.
Thank you so much, Erika. I think we've hit the bottom of the barrel in terms of questions. We tried our best to make sure the Vermont Tenants Hotline was available for you all, and the links. We'll also be sending that all of the information, including the hotline, the links to the 2 websites we referenced in the follow-up email. So make sure you did register for this event. If you didn't, you can just go on to fairhousingmonthvt.org. It should be pretty easy to register that way. Feel free to give us an email at fhp@cvoeo.org if you have any issues registering or have issues accessing the resources that we've talked about. Also, just a reminder, part of this webinar series is that we're celebrating Fair Housing Month. So April is Fair Housing Month, and obviously we had a lot of events planned. We wanted to see you all in person and couldn't do that because of this strange moment that seemed to come out of nowhere. And we've done our best to transition to putting all of our activities online. So if you go to fairhousingmonthvt.org, you'll see that we've also have an online art gallery. So we've put out some prompts for people to respond to in terms of making visual work that represents thriving, inclusive communities. If you feel so inclined to respond to that prompt, feel free to email your art to FHP. What is our email? FHP@CVOEO.org. And yeah, please go ahead and check out our website. Check out we have really beautiful art submissions up on there from a variety of artists so far that we're really happy to share. Again, vtlawhelp.org/coronavirus updates. That's the reference we've been using to get the most up-to-date information. This stuff is changing really fast. We're just trying our best to stay ahead of the game here, but we're learning new answers every day. Always, please call our hotline, the Vermont Tenants Hotline, if you have questions about something that's happening with your landlord. We work really closely with Vermont Tenants, the Fair Housing Project does, and Vermont Legal Aid, so we'll just do a really good job to make sure that we refer you to the resource you need. So any kind of questions, we're there for you. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Erika, for joining us, for Karin, Madeline for being in the chat. She did a really great job at answering people's questions, and we're so happy to have been able to do this today. We hope to see you all next week, same time, 12:30. We're going to be doing a conversation with Vermont Human Rights Commission. So please join us for that. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Bye.